everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show on Sunday, the 13th of October, 2019. And tomorrow is Columbus Day. We had actually a pretty decent weekend overall in my neck of the woods anyway. Today we had sunshine, some patchy clouds. Now we're dealing with a bit of a wave that is moving by to my south. It's got a little bit of rain with it. And we're setting up for a nice Columbus Day, and then starting on Tuesday across the southern states, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, get ready for some much-needed rainfall, and in some areas it may actually be a substantial amount of rainfall on the order of an inch or more. And then we are going to see a major storm develop in the east on Wednesday. It will comprise of a low moving across the Great Lakes and then a southern feature that will deepen and become the main storm as it moves its way northeast of New Jersey and toward southern New England, toward southeastern New England, toward Cape Cod. And eventually, we're going to have a deep low sitting somewhere right near Portland, Maine, by the time we get to Thursday morning. So this will probably be the first widespread rainfall that we've seen in quite a while. And we have to go back to last spring, really. Thunderstorms, yeah, there were days where we had some thunderstorms roll on through where some areas got a substantial amount of rain, but there was always at least somebody in the general vicinity, a large area of geography that got left out. Well, I think this time around we're getting a nice sweep of rain that's going to cover a large geographic area and is going to go somewhat, not a long, I wouldn't say a long way, but it is going to make a bit of a dent in some of the short-term dry conditions that we have in parts of the eastern and southeastern part of the U.S. So we waited until the Jet game was over. I was struggling with this for the last 5 minutes, aside from the fact of watching them throw penalty after penalty after penalty. But when you're a Giant fan, and I guess for me, I dislike Dallas far more than I dislike the Jets. I really don't dislike the Jets. I'm kind of neutral about the Jets. But it's the Jet fans that I get a kick out of watching them being tortured on a yearly basis. They'll win the first game or the first two games, and they're going to the Super Bowl. And then, of course, obviously, it all circles the drain. So I'm wondering, now that they finally won their first game and they're 1-4, I'm sure there are going to be some of my Jet fan friends who are going to say, well, they're not mathematically eliminated out of the playoffs just yet. And they'll start working out every scenario. So I guess it's more fun watching that. I mean, the Giants are 2-4. They're not really going to go anywhere, but I'm more interested in seeing that their new quarterback performs well. I think for the long term, that will be important. Okay, end of my sports analysis. So you're here to to check out weather. We're going to look at Siberian snow cover tonight through the 10th of October, and we'll explain what it means and what it doesn't mean, and where we are and where we might be going in the next few weeks. But we'll get to that in a moment. So let's. A big collective hi to everybody, and the chairman, Scott Briller, I don't think he's on tonight. He's taking care of his mom, who last he told me, was doing a bit better, and that is very good to hear. Just double checking to make sure he isn't here. No, he is not on the live stream tonight. So we send him and his mom our very best. Okay, so let's get going. And we're going to, we're going to start off with tonight's Eastern Satellite Loop, so we can see the first wave of low pressure that is moving along. And I mean, we use that term loosely here because it's a very, very weak wave on a frontal boundary that in and of itself is rather weak. But you see these clouds streaming up southwest to northeast, and they're pushing northward. Hang on one second, folks. Because nobody rings my phone when I'm not doing a live stream. That's the rule. So here we go. You got all these clouds moving northeastward. There's just this sort of weak wave. There's a cold front that's swinging across the Great Lakes. You can see those clouds back through the lakes. It's kind of uh, helping this to slide more eastward than move northward. So the rain that's with this, I'm not really overly concerned about. And the clouds extend down through southeastern Virginia, through North and South Carolina, and through a good chunk of Georgia and back over into parts northern Georgia and northern Alabama. And there's been some rain in that area showing up on the radar tonight. And you can see it here. There's actually some fairly moderate to heavy rain covering a good portion of the state of Alabama, the northern half of Georgia, the northern half of the northwest half of South Carolina, and then extends out into North Carolina. Starts to get thinned out a bit, but more patchy as you head up into the Delmarva Peninsula. And there's a little patch that has made its way up almost to central New Jersey and then sliding out to the east. This is going to be short-lived. That area is going to slide more east than move north. Some areas from central New Jersey southward. I was thinking more southern, the southern third of New Jersey southward. Might see a couple of brief showers, and maybe they touch parts of Long Island for a brief time. But other than that, really, there isn't much happening. And with the secondary front that's out around the Great Lakes, that's still rotating around this upper low, and we've got some showers going on here in parts of Wisconsin and northern Michigan and back up into northeastern Minnesota. Might even be a few snowflakes still in the mix. I really didn't look at the observations up there too closely. Looking at temperatures, they're mostly up there. They're in the low 40s. I'm seeing rain. I don't see any snowflakes being reported by anybody up there. So it's probably, there's not a whole lot of cold air around. Here's our wave in the east, sitting right along the Virginia coast on this weak stationary boundary that extends down into the Florida Panhandle. And of course, you've got this weak high that is over Mississippi. And you're getting some overrunning precip that is occurring north of this frontal boundary that's happening in the southern states. So we're setting up for what should be a pretty nice day on Monday, and for many areas in the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic, that should actually even hold on until Tuesday. However, I want to take a look. I want you to look here at the mid-level water vapor imagery loop, and it does show fairly well the whole state of the upper air tonight. Let me hang on a second. I'm going to move this down. There we go. And I'll make that one notch smaller. Excellent. So you have your trough in red, so you can see it. There you go. So here's your upper low, right around the Great Lakes, still spinning away, and it's a very broad bowl. You've got this moisture here that is running in the in a west-southwest flow coming out across Baja to over New Mexico and Texas, and then you see the moisture continuing in the southeast. And again, there's not a whole lot of northward component here. You can see that northern area is not really bulging very much. But the other thing of importance is what's going on in the west, because we do have another trough here coming into the west coast. I'm exaggerating that it's on the coast. It may not quite be there yet, but it will be. And this is going to be the trigger for what I think is going to be a major storm that's going to develop. When I say a major storm, I'm talking about a storm that's going to produce some hefty rains, gusty winds ahead of it to a certain extent, and behind it to a much larger extent. And I'm talking about a low that's probably going to deepen down into the 980s and maybe even into the 970s in terms of lowest pressure when it finally makes its way up into southern Maine, which it will do Wednesday night into Thursday. The pattern is amplifying with the big upper low that's sitting over the lakes and the trough that is coming in off the west coast, and that is setting all of this off. Now we're going to bring up the U.S. Let's bring up the U.S. surface map. Little brief view there of the 16-day snow cover map across Asia, which we'll come back to. So here we go. Here's our wave. It goes out. Now we're starting to see the energy. We're at Tuesday morning here. And you can see at this point, we're starting to see moisture building. Hang on. Okay, let's bring that back. Okay, so here's our next weather system right in here. Okay, and you also have there's a southern part to this that is evident, and that is creating. You're seeing this area of rain that is starting to break out Tuesday morning from northeast Texas across Louisiana into Mississippi and Alabama. You've got one low center that's up here. There's another low that's probably right about there. Cooler air or chillier air is coming down on the backside into the northern and central Rockies. You've got this nice big high here in the east Tuesday morning, center of high pressure. So that I think bodes well weather-wise for my neck of the woods and for up in New England. Well, this is all going to come eastward. Now, you'll see when we get to Wednesday morning, you've got a fairly wrapped up low on the GFS at least. The other models are kind of differing on this because there is a second low right in here where the isobars are kind of bulged a little bit in the mountains of North Carolina. So you're seeing a gradual expansion of precip. Here's what's left of the, this is all measurable precip that we're seeing. There's no snow here, by the way. The cold air is kind of trapped up here, up in Canada and along the Canadian border. And we're not seeing that being drawn down in the low and mid levels. In the high levels of the atmosphere, yes, but in the lower levels, not so much this time around. We don't have a real true Canadian connection where we're getting cold air coming down from all the way up. This is on Wednesday morning. I'm going to go to the radar view. Okay, so here's what the radar is going to look like. So if you want to believe the GFS, and the NAM is pretty close to this. It's not that much different. You see it here. It's got a bit of a narrower line, a sharper line of storms, of showers and storms into eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, western New York by Wednesday morning. And then you see that southern area that's over Virginia and North and South Carolina. It comes out, this is how the NAM sees it, and then it sort of blossoms out to a much more widespread area during Wednesday afternoon as it lifts up to the northeast. The low in the north is northeast of Lake Huron. There's a new low center that the NAM shows east of the Virginia coast and then runs up to southeast of Cape Cod. I think that's too far south and east. I think the GFS and the European idea is probably a bit better, and it would make more sense to me given what the upper air looks like. But if you look at the GFS, it holds on to that identity of that northern low. You can't see it too well, but there is a low here Wednesday afternoon, probably just to the south, near Cape May, Delmarva, right in there somewhere. There's a secondary low because you got this, occluded low and this low, and right at the point of occlusion, you're getting development of a secondary low, and that low bombs out. You see it here by 2 a.m. Thursday. You have a 984 low southeast of Cape Cod. A lot of precip develops here across New England and on up and swings over on Thursday into Maine and eventually up into New Brunswick and over Nova Scotia. But this whole area seems to be blossoming out quite nicely, and I think it could, at the very least, produce a general 1-inch rainfall, and maybe we could be a little more bullish and go on the order of 1 inch to 1.5 inches with some local amounts up to 2 inches. I'm going under what both the NAM and the GFS are indicating. The NAM is actually quite bullish with rainfall amounts over New England of 2 to 3 inches at least as the low lifts up, and it gets to about a 974 low at this point. The other thing that happens when we get into Thursday is that the pressure gradient really tightens up a lot. This map here which is showing you the measurable rainfall and not the radar echoes. But you can see the isobars better, so that's what I thought I'd bring this one up. The isobars are really tight here. So I think we're going to probably see some rather strong gusty winds in the northeast down into the northern mid-Atlantic on Thursday on the probably some gusts into the 30, 40 mile an hour range or even a bit higher than that as that low just takes its time. Gets down to a 971 as it moves into southwest New Brunswick and then moves northeastward or east-northeastward from there and starts to fill. So it looks like it's reaching peak intensity here over Maine. So this will be a pretty good wind producer and a very good rain producer when it's all said and done. And the reason why this is happening is the upper air is actually quite dynamic the way it's structured. So here's your upper low. We're at this evening now, so this is 0Z. So there's your upper low, and you see your trough that is coming in the west. It's very evident here on the GFS, pretty obvious. You got it right there, and here's your upper low that's just very broad and just sort of spinning around. You've got this dry westerly flow for the most part, which is bringing in the nice day for Columbus Day. That upper low heads up towards James Bay, but it never really quite pulls out. And if you'll notice at the top of the frame, right in here, there's like an arm. Well, it's not the straightest arm in the world. Let me try that again. But there's like an arm, an east-west arm that is rotating around the upper low. And here's your trough that's come in from the Pacific. And it really does look like a bit of a powerhouse there. It already has that negative tilt to it. And now that upper low is rotating, the shortwave trough is digging into the Great Lakes, and the trough actually goes what we call negative tilt, okay? And that's when the axis of this trough, if you look here on this frame, the axis of the trough is like this. That's a positive to almost neutral tilt. If it's tilted northeast, southwest, we call that a positive tilt. When it's tilted northwest, southeast, we call it a negative tilt. And when they go negative, like they do, like you see here, this is when you see you tend to see rapid intensification of storm systems. Basically, the whole upper air jet is just swinging in a negatively tilted trough, is swinging up and around. That's not to say you can't have strong storms in a positively tilted trough. You can, but when troughs are negative, when troughs go negative like this, this is when you get a lot of deepening. The heights are falling very rapidly as that upper low goes the trough goes negative and that upper low deepens, and this causes the surface low to intensify as well. And that's what we saw when we showed you the surface map. And this is going to be a big player here in the east for the middle and latter part of the week. Now we are going to have colder air coming down behind it. That's going to be moving into the northeast for Thursday and Friday and down into the mid-Atlantic states. And by the way, the jet stream gets pretty far south here, gets down into southern Georgia, northern Florida. We already have another trough coming into the west, and there's a ridge right up in the middle of the country. So once this system plays through, of course, it's going to pull out. Remember, we have a progressive pattern here. Everything is moving along from west to east. There is no blocking. So you're going to see air masses come in and go out and come in again and go out again. So as that upper low pulls out over next weekend, we're going to see a bit of a ridge building along the East Coast, and actually an upper high does build off the southeast coast of the United States late next weekend and into Monday. Now, this is a lot different than having an upper high, say, here or a ridge that's built all the way up into the northeast in this fashion. That's what we had a couple of weeks ago. We don't have that this time around. We have a southwest flow that's going to bring up warmer air going from the cold air pulls out. You're going to warm up ahead of the next trough, which actually has some punch to it. And that trough is going to swing eastward. So I think we're going to probably see a cold front approach here Monday night or on Tuesday. And then that will go out. And guess what? Here comes the next one. that drops in the longer range. And now we're almost to the end of the month. The model is showing it on this run, actually a fairly impressive deep trough here in the east and a strong ridge building up in the west. So this is where you might see, if this verifies, and I don't know that it will, but if this verifies, this would support a fairly decent shot of cold air coming down from Canada in the longer term. Uh, the trough seems to want to come into the east. It just doesn't seem as if the trough wants to hang around very long. It comes in and goes out. And again, that's the progressive nature of this upper pattern that we have because of the fact that it only figures that we had blocking for most of the summer. It disappears because that's how it works. That's how it's worked many times over the past 10 or 11 years. But if you watch, there's no real high latitude blocking going on. Just things are just moving along from west to east, from the Pacific. The one thing I will say, well, two things I will say here. One is that you do notice that there is a lot of amplitude with these troughs. They're not these sort of flat systems that are going by. The wavelength on this trough here, looking at the long range, is pretty extensive. I mean, it runs up from northern Canada all the way down into the Gulf states. And you've got a trough from the Aleutians down to Hawaii. If you're want to see shots of cold air come in, you do want to see the establishment of a trough along 160 and a ridge in this position. So because this would favor a positive PNA or Pacific North America index, and that means you'll have a trough in the east, which you're trying to have, and a ridge in the west. And if you'll notice that the wind flow, if you follow the wind flow here, it comes all the way up from Canada. Again, assuming that this verifies. But we are seeing that the trough wants to come into the east, even if it is a progressive pattern. And just to carry it to the end of the period, we're pretty much in the same place. The trough in the Pacific, part of it pulls out, but another one drops back in. So I would tend to think that as we go toward the end of the month, if that's the case, you're still going to want to see troughing. You're going to wind up seeing troughing in the eastern part of the United States. Now, let's talk about Siberian snow cover growth, shall we? Surely. Okay, so did I do this right? Hang on one second. I got to figure out how I'm doing this. Yes, I did it right. Okay. Just give it a moment. Or did I? Hang in there, folks. I'm trying here. Nope. I'm going to have to try to do this another way. All right, so hang on one second. Bear with us. I'm going to bring this chart up. I thought I could bring this chart up full screen. I guess I can't. Copy. I'll try it this way. I have to do these things on the fly. This is just just the way it is. I wish I had, when you work in TV, you've got somebody that's doing this stuff for you. There you go. So I put it on the paint on the paint box. So this is thanks to Dr. Judah Cohen. He posted this on Twitter, and we appreciate that he does all this research here. And it's so interesting. Whether it works or not is another matter, but it is very interesting to follow. But looking at snow cover growth through the first 10 days of the month of October, the one thing that we have noticed is the snow cover growth, which is in red. Okay, so the red is the current year, is running at a very, very robust rate. It's hard to see, even on a larger view that I have. It's a little hard to see, but it's either right at the number one position or possibly in the top 2 or 3. There's 3 years that are sort of lying on top of each other there. It is well ahead of last year, which is the darker green, and that's kind of lies on the low end of that scale. Now, when we finished last year, we were up near the top end It's the month of October that that he looks at. The idea is that the rate of snow cover growth in Siberia during the month of October is a an indicator of the kind of winter that we may have here in the eastern half of the United States. A rapid snow cover growth would translate into below normal temperatures in general now. Okay, in general, we're talking about a lot of geography here, so you can have a lot of variation. Below average temperatures and above average snowfall. The indicator actually worked quite well until after the winter of 2014, 2015, because I think at that point everybody started following it. And as I've said before, the best way to get an indicator not to work is for everybody to follow it, because once everybody is following it, it stops working. And no, there are, and the other thing is that remember, there are no magic bullets here. There are so many other variables to look at when it comes to the winter time, and I don't think you could look at any one thing and base your entire forecast on it. Uh, Perhaps the only thing that you could probably bet on is that if you have a very strong El Nino or a very strong La Nina, where you're pushed to the edges of the envelope in terms of extremes, then my feeling is that, those two factors would probably supersede anything else. But we don't have that this year. The El Nino is gone, and it's not coming back anytime soon, and we're good. So we should be fine from that respect. I looked at the Pacific Ocean water temperatures. We looked at them yesterday. They really didn't show much of anything with regards to an El Nino or a La Nina. The equatorial Pacific is right along the just north of the equator in the northern hemisphere. The ocean looks like it is a little bit cooler than average, but it's nothing extraordinary. And much of the Pacific is running near or slightly above average. So I think what we're seeing is just we're still, now that we're at Enzo neutral, when the El Nino ended, we're still kind of seeing the residual effects, uh, waiting for everything to just get back down to near normal. There's whatever threshold we hit, we're just kind of just finishing the correction there to get back down to absolute neutral, and we're going to just probably sit there for a while. So if we've got a neutral situation there, you could argue that then maybe these indicators might work better. Uh, I don't know. Well, one of the other big problem with all of this is the fact that you really don't know until hindsight. So you really have to kind of wait till after the winter's over to figure out whether the indicator worked or not, and that that's kind of tough. At that point, the winter is over. But as far as what's happening going forward in terms of snow cover growth, let me just get rid of this. At least over North America, and then we'll also look at Asia. But over the next 2 weeks, it looks like you're seeing snow cover growth where you're supposed to see it, which is across virtually all of Canada except the extreme south and on up into the northern Rockies. So it looks like there'll be a fairly solid snow cover growth over North America over the next 2 weeks. And in Asia, as we look at that over the next 2 weeks, actually the snow cover growth here is rather robust across much of Eurasia. The southern flank, in particular, on the left side, is down to about 43, 43, 42, 43 degrees north. It's a little bit lacking when you get to the west toward Eastern Europe. But even here in the easternmost, I'm sorry, in the westernmost parts of Siberia and westernmost Russia, you are seeing some snow cover growth there. So I'm thinking that the GFS has, would argue that the snow cover growth indicator, when we come back to look at it maybe 10 days from now, will probably still be close to the top of the charts. So you can if you're a snow lover, you can at least say, okay, well, at least that might be in my favor. But again, remember, it's one of many things you could look at, and except when you have, in my view, when you have the El Nino or La Nina sitting in extreme positions, that would sort of supersede everything else. I don't see a whole lot happening, by the way, in the tropics. I didn't look at the 18Z run of the GFS, or nor did I give it a very strong look in the tropics on the other models. It's still trying to do something in the Southwest Caribbean, which the GFS and the European now pretty much take that straight west into the Pacific side. The system that comes off the African coast you could barely find, but that wasn't going to develop into much anyway. The models were also trying to hint at something getting into the Southwest Gulf, a piece of this system coming from the Southwest Caribbean moving westward. Part of it was going to go into the Southwest Gulf. I can barely find anything there. And there were a couple of runs over the weekend that were trying to show some sort of little spinning systems moving north of the leewards and Puerto Rico into the Bahamas. And in fact, I think there was one run that took something in the Gulf of Mexico and over New Orleans. And of course, it's gone now. So I think now that Melissa is out of our hair, I think we could certainly see maybe one more named storm before the whole season is done. And I think you have to look in the climatologically favored areas in the Caribbean, and particularly in the Northwest Caribbean, maybe in parts of the Southwest Atlantic, down off Florida and the Bahamas, and into the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. The only thing I would point out is if you're going to wind up with a deep trough in the east that's going to go all the way down into the Gulf, that may shut the hurricane season down early. There is a broad argument that suggests that hurricane seasons that shut down early happen as winter revs up early. So, in other words, if you see hurricane season shut off from this point on, if we're done with named storms, it might be telling us that the winter is going to be at the very least front end loaded, whereas you get seasons where you have systems still developing into November, and particularly if they're developing into late November or early December, that maybe those winters are more back end loaded. But when you're trying to give an idea of what a whole season is going to be like, and you're talking about an area that goes from Maine down maybe into North Georgia and west across North Alabama, North Mississippi to the Mississippi River, and then northward from there. If we're talking about that sort of general area, that's that's a huge geography where snowfall amounts on the southern end on an average season are in the single digits, and snowfalls on the northern end of that and some of the snow belts are in the triple digits. So who's to say whether some areas are going to be above and some areas are going to be below? There are years where when the I-95 corridor is getting much above normal snowfall, in a lot of those years, there have been instances that when you go further north up into upstate New York or into central and northern New England, the snowfall is normal at best or even below average in those places. So there's a lot to look at, and you can't really, it's almost silly to just sort of paint this broad brush over a large area of trying to figure out a general forecast for a 3-month time frame. I think it's just really such an exercise in futility, and yet everybody is just obsessed by it on a day-to-day basis this time of year. And as I have said many times, you will never find a forecast on the internet that will say that the upcoming winter is going to feature above normal temperatures and very little snowfall. Those forecasts don't exist. Okay, you'll if you do find one, let me know. Okay, we have been having the apocalypse winter forecast every year as far as I can remember, ever since I've gotten really involved in all of this, and even before that. There's nothing new there, and I don't think, except for from a few people that are out there, very few people, I would really just probably not pay very much attention. It's better, I think it's far better that we just follow what the overall pattern is. Let the pattern tell you where we're going. Okay, I think you could have a lot more fun that way. So everybody is just now, of course, reminiscing as Javon Perry is reminiscing about the winter of 13-14 for Boston, which got 99.89 inches. They couldn't make it 100, could they, Javon? They went to 99.9. They just could not give you that tenth of an inch. Uh, so for all intents and purposes, you got 100 inches that year. I don't care if it was 99.89. I say it's 100. And Boston got 110 for 14 and 15. You know, it's amazing. That was quite that February in particular. And it didn't even have to be all the way up in Boston. Connecticut did really well that year. There was snow everywhere, as I recall. And Long Island also got involved in some of those, but a lot of the lows that month, as I recall, tracked southeastward from the lakes, and they kind of moved off the New Jersey coast, where I was literally right on the edge of some good snows. South and west of there, not so much. That was during that one stretch in the month of February, but every single one, it seemed like it was one after another that was burying southern New England, southern and southeastern New England in that particular winter. It was a lot of fun. 14-15 was, one of the things about 14-15, as I recall, Javon Perry, is is the fact that winter, well, 13-14, I actually liked a bit better from the standpoint of if you're a winter weather lover, because 13-14 started early and ended late. That, as I remember, at least in my house, I had snow on the ground pretty much when we got the first accumulating snows sometime during the month of December. I had snow on the ground pretty much nonstop until the first day of spring. And 14-15 was slow getting going for my area anyway. But once we got past mid-January, it was brutal. And in fact, as I remember that year, my local lake was frozen right up until the last days of March, when the sun angle finally did its job, and there was enough daylight so that the ice finally melted and disappeared. But I had never seen I have never seen the lake, my local lake here, Lake Ronkonkoma, which is actually fairly deep. At one point in that lake is 63 feet deep, even though it's a very small lake. It's only maybe about a couple of miles wide at most, at its widest point. But I have never seen it frozen that late into the winter and early spring like I did on that particular year. And in most years, that lake does not freeze. There are a lot of winters where it doesn't freeze, but in cold winters it certainly does. And that was something to see. 13-14, it was frozen solid for so long. I mean, I've walked across that lake when it was frozen, which was always a lot of fun. It was one of my favorite things to do, is walk across frozen lake, as long as you know that the ice is thick enough to hold you. And as long as I see, the ice thickness was measured, 10 or 11 inches thick. I mean, that's enough to hold a Mack truck practically. You'd be surprised how it's even better than concrete when it's frozen that thick. You just can't break it. You have to blast it. So it's interesting when you're walking across a lake, knowing that there's all this water underneath you, and the ice is holding you up. But just be sure. I do not encourage it, okay, unless you absolutely know that the lake underneath you is frozen. Martha Sandwell from West Sayville, not that far away, Martha. Nice to see you here. And Ruthless Goat, yeah, you pointed out the action that's gone on in your neck of the woods out in Colorado with that snowstorm and the temperatures that went from 80 to 20 in 24 hours. They basically ruined your fall color season. Done. And that's a shame. 9 degrees is tough on green leaves. I'm sure it is. Yeah, I noticed today here by me that looks like the color change is getting underway now. On Long Island, usually we don't see much of a color change until the last week of October. The first few days of November is when it really hits peak here. But I noticed today that a lot of trees have already uh, changed color. And that's, I think, due to the fact that we've had some cool shots and the nights have been especially cool. And that helps the process along as far as the color changes are concerned. Okay. Oh, Chris Alley, when the Great South Bay froze over. Oh, yeah, you can walk over to Fire Island. Well, the Great South Bay, it's been dredged out deep, but a lot of the areas in a lot of the Great South Bay is pretty shallow. I was out there with my buddy on a boat and got caught in a sandbar where you're out in the middle of it, and the water at low tide is only 2 feet deep, if that. So yeah, when the Great South Bay freezes, you can walk across it, and I think there are pictures back from when it happened many years ago, when it happened in the 20s and 30s, of people driving their cars across the Great South Bay, and also driving their cars across the Hudson River from Jersey to Manhattan, from Manhattan to Jersey in the years where the Hudson River froze over. So it does happen sometimes, not often, but sometimes. Um, Matt Warman on Tropical Tidbits. What is the 700 millibar Vort wind link on lower dynamics? Okay, so if you look on Tropical Tidbits to what you just said, which is 700 millibar. So what we're looking at is, first of all, we're looking at the 700 millibar level jet stream and the vorticity. So you're looking at where we have maximum rotation and minimum rotation. So if you see a vorticity maximum, which is usually in yellow or in the darker brown inside the yellow, that's where you're seeing rotation being indicated at that level of the atmosphere. So you basically have a fairly strong shortwave trough that is in play when you see that. And there's a map also, if you look for the 500 millibar is available also. I like to use this 700 millibar rotation map. I'm sorry, the vorticity map when it comes to looking at thunderstorms and severe weather. I find it particularly useful to use that, because that level at 10,000 feet is kind of a good mid-level to look at. If you look up above 15, 20,000 feet, it's a little too high. If you look down at 5,000 feet or less, it's a little too low. So 10,000 is a nice, middle range there where you could look at it. If you see these, little brown bursts that show up on the local map of strong jet stream maximums, where you get these wind bursts of 50, 60, or 70 knots, that's usually a pretty good indicator that you're dealing with some severe weather. So I find it particularly useful when it comes to looking at thunderstorm development. Yeah, Bill Huber, you still have to pay the toll when you cross the Hudson. I'm sure they had toll collectors on either side, especially now. You think they're going to give up what is it, $16? And I think it's going up to $17 or $18. And the Verrazano is 19. That's round trip without Easy Pass, by the way, for those of you who don't live here. The Easy Pass rate, I believe, is $12 on the Jersey crossings, and on the New York crossings, it's a little over $12. So it's ridiculous. I pay $12 a day in tolls. I'm not going to miss that. And half for the last 4 years, I am not going to miss paying $60 a week to cross a bridge to go to work, just to go to work. Okay, so the 18Z. Okay, 18Z is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our time. Okay, it's 1800 hours or 6 o'clock in Greenwich time. So 18Z is Greenwich time. So it's 6 o'clock in the evening, or 1800 hours. So it'd be military time, that's 6 o'clock. So it's 6 in the evening in Greenwich, England, and 0Z is midnight in Greenwich, England. So when you see the 0Z, it's usually the next day. So 18Z, our time, you're going to subtract 4 hours, okay, from the clock time. So instead of 6 o'clock p.m. at 18Z, it's actually 2 p.m. in the east, all right, and 11 a.m. in the west. Midnight Greenwich Mean Time is 8 p.m. in the east, and 5 p.m. in the west. And when we go to standard time, you're going to subtract 5 hours. Okay, so when we're on daylight saving time, you subtract 4 hours. When we're on standard time, you subtract 5 hours. All right, so I hope that straightens you out on that. If not, you can. If you got other questions, you can get them to me. Daniel Fitzsimmons. I mean, there's so much you can just Google. Just Google historical weather. There's so many sites that come up. I mean, you can start with the Weather Service. You can start with the New York City Weather Service office and go to their Climo page, and there's tons of stuff over there, and and go from there. So use Google. There's a lot of the Climo site. There are too many for me to even begin to mention, but I would start with the New York City weather page, weather.gov/NYC, and go to their climate, go to past climate, and you can go to. They got so much stuff in there with regards to past climate. David Schwartz. My dad worked in the South Bronx for years. He would cross the Throgs Neck Bridge, kept a roll of quarters. I remember that when it was. I actually remember when it was 75 cents to cross. I might even 75 cents. I remember. I think it might even have been 50 when I was a kid, or 25 when I was very young. But yeah, now it's $6.12 each way, which is just nuts. I'm sorry, it's just nuts. And the bridges are constantly under construction. When was the last time they did any work on those bridges? Mirtha Gunter, they have been doing nonstop work on those bridges I've been driving that route now for 5 years. There's nonstop construction. It never ends. There's a magic day every month, every couple of months. There's a magic day where there's no construction going on, and I actually enjoy the wintertime driving when it's not snowing, because usually they don't do much construction during the winter unless they absolutely have to. So it makes things a lot easier. But oh my God, there were times where the traffic at the bridges were so bad, and there's only 2 crossings. So you would think if they were doing construction on one bridge, they wouldn't be doing it on the other so that you get the traffic flow. But oftentimes they do it on both. They shut down 3 lanes to 1 lane, and it takes you forever to cross them. And I'm paying $12 a day to use that stuff. I don't use the Triborough, David. I will cross either the Throgs Neck or the Whitestone, whichever one Waze takes me across. Okay, and Daniel, this is the last one for today, question-wise, and then I'm going to go, because you're asking about the NAO. The NAO, I believe, is positive. If I had to guess without looking, I would be shocked if it wasn't. And in fact, it is slightly positive. Actually goes slightly neutral later this coming week when we have that big low developing. And then it goes somewhat positive, not crazy positive, but somewhat positive from the 19th through the end of the month. The EPO is strongly positive later this week. And that's why the way the pressure pattern is set up, that's why it's going to get chilly behind this storm, but it's not going to get really cold. It's not like we're going to see frosts and freezes, I don't think. Well, we're not, because of the fact of the wind. But the EPO is actually strongly positive later this week through this weekend, and then it kind of gets neutral to negative late in the period. And the Pacific North America Index is negative to strongly negative this week, and then starts to trend back toward the neutral line later in the forecast period. So I think that pretty much is all she wrote here. Okay, so have a great night, and I hope everybody again had a great weekend. Let's look ahead to Monday. I know it's a holiday, but I'll be doing my regular thing. So we'll have weather in 5 in the morning. There'll be website posts, and also will be, of course, for Patreon members. Look for posts there, and we'll have our live stream tomorrow night. We'll also do a Patreon member weather in 10 video, which I did today. And if you haven't downloaded my free weather app, the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee app on Google Play or on the App Store, do so. It's there for both all mobile devices, and it's absolutely free. And if you're on an Android, download Angry Ben's weather app, the Angry Weatherman, and make that also part of your weather app family, as we might say. Okay, so everybody have a great evening. Thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow.